The neon sign of the Hudson Diner flickered weakly in the night, casting unsteady streaks of light onto the soaked pavement and stretching long ghost-like shadows across the ground. Emily Carson pulled her thin jacket tighter around herself as she stepped out of the diner, meeting the biting cold of a late October night in Newark. Her legs throbbed after 12 straight hours on her feet, and the smell of grease mixed with sweat and exhaustion still clung to her faded uniform like a second skin. The clock on her phone blinked softly, reading 2:17 in the morning. The last bus had left long ago, which meant she would have to walk nearly 40 minutes back to her rundown apartment, where the heater functioned as if it were taking its final breaths. Emily exhaled, her breath dissolving into the cold air in thin, trembling clouds. She turned into the narrow alley behind the diner, the shortcut she had walked for years. But tonight, something made her stop. A man was slumped against the brick wall, his body curled in on itself, his expensive suit drenched in rain, the dim yellow street light catching only the edge of his face, limp and motionless. She had planned to ignore it, planned to keep walking like she always did. In this neighborhood, drunk men and tics were nothing unusual, and getting involved usually meant trouble. But something about this man made Emily pause. Even in the weak light, she could see the fine fabric, the meticulous tailoring, the polished leather shoes, nothing that belonged to this poor, battered part of town. She stepped closer, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Hey, sir, can you hear me?" No answer. She knelt, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, his head tipped to the side, revealing a young face with strong features, warm, toned skin now pale, and lips drained of color. His breath was so faint she had to lean in to feel it. He wasn't drunk. He was somewhere on the thin edge between life and death. Her hands trembled as she searched the pocket of his suit for a wallet, an action she would normally consider a violation. But right now, it was necessary. A thick, luxurious leather wallet emerged, stuffed with cash. But what froze Emily was the driver's license, Michael Russo. She had never heard the name, but behind it was a strange business card. No company name, no address. Only a string of embossed gold numbers, and a single handwritten line in elegant black ink on the back that read, "In case of emergency." She stared at it, her heartbeat quickening. Who was this man? Why was he carrying something like this? And why was he unconscious in a filthy alley in the heart of Newark? The rain began to fall harder, and Michael's breathing weakened. Whoever he was, Emily understood one thing. He needed help. Now call an ambulance. In this area, waiting for one could take 15 minutes, if it came at all. She looked down at the card again. The string of numbers felt like a lifeline in the dark. Her hands shook as she dialed. 1 ring, 2, who is this? The voice that answered was low, firm, and cold as steel, sending a shiver up her spine. Even through the phone, she could feel the power in those 3 words. "I have found someone named Michael Russo. He's unconscious. I think he's dying." Silence stretched so long she thought the call had dropped. Then the voice returned sharper. An order carved in granite. "Where?" "The alley next to Hudson Diner on Clinton Street. Do not move. Do not call anyone else. Do not let anyone near him. I'm coming." The line went dead. Emily stared at the dark screen, a chill crawling into her bones. The man on the phone hadn't asked about a hospital, hadn't mentioned an ambulance. He had issued commands. And she, for some inexplicable reason, had obeyed. She knelt beside Michael, slipped off her jacket, and draped it over him, trying to keep him warm, though his body was already freezing. Her heart raced as she whispered, "Hold on. Don't give up." She didn't know what world she had just stepped into. She only knew that her choice would change her life forever. If you're still listening and this story has stirred something inside you, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Like and share this video so we have the strength to keep bringing you heartfelt stories every day. And if you don't mind, where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and tell us which corner of the world this story has reached. We cherish every word you share. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the pavement and soaking through Emily's shoulders, cold as fingers tightening around her. She stayed by Michael Russo, afraid to move even an inch, as if stepping away might push him over the edge between life and death. Worry and fear tangled inside her. But something else rose too, uncertain, if it was instinct or an emotion she couldn't yet name. She didn't know who this man was, but it was painfully clear he belonged to a different world. One woven with danger and power. Even so, she couldn't walk away. She looked at his face, at the dark hair plastered wet across his forehead, his pale skin stark against the dark fabric of his suit. She checked his pulse again. It was still there, faint but steady, the only thing anchoring her in place. Her phone still held the lingering warmth of the call, though the warning echoed through her mind like a tolling bell. Don't call anyone else. Don't let anyone near. She bit her lip and scanned the empty alley, hearing only water dripping and the flicker of the street light behind the diner. Every minute stretched like an entire lifetime. Emily glanced at her phone. 2:20. She had never seen the street so silent, never felt time drag so slowly. Beneath the jacket she had placed over him, Michael's chest rose and fell lightly, reminding her that time remained but not much. Each breath was a quiet plea, fragile as the night fog. She wondered if she had made the right decision. The man on the phone sounded like a crime boss in a movie. Just 3 sentences from him had made it painfully clear that she had crossed a boundary between her ordinary world and one where laws were not written on paper. But then she looked at Michael again. He was too young. Maybe 37, she guessed, and there was something about his features that made her believe he wasn't as cruel as she feared. He might be part of that world, but he might also be its victim. Rain rolled down his face, merging with the water dripping from the diner's awning, making him look like a forgotten stone statue. Emily raised her hand to shield his face from the rain, gently, as if afraid to hurt him. She couldn't explain why she cared so much about a stranger, but something inside her insisted she must not turn away. 2:25. A sound in the distance shattered the silence. First, an engine, then headlights splashing across the alley wall. Emily turned, narrowing her eyes against the glare. A sleek black car slid into the alley like a shadow, followed by a second, then a third. Tires hissed on wet pavement, and for a moment, everything felt suspended. The doors opened at once. Men in dark suits stepped out, tall and broad, moving with a rehearsed precision that sent a cold ripple down her back. They said nothing, didn't ask for directions. Every gaze locked onto her and Michael. Emily swallowed hard. Her whole body trembling, not from the cold, but from the realization that she was witnessing something far outside her world. Then a man appeared, not the tallest, but the moment he stepped forward, the very air seemed to shift around him, as though even the rain held its breath. Silver-streaked hair, a long coat, a calm stride wrapped in authority so absolute it felt ancient. His eyes swept the scene, landing on his son, then on her. Emily felt stripped bare beneath that gaze. No introduction, no confirmation needed. He already knew this was the man she had called Don Vincent Russo. One didn't need to be a genius to understand that Emily Carson had stepped into a world where kindness was not only rare, but an act that could decide life or death. She had saved the son of one of the most powerful men in the city, and now she would have to live with the consequences. Don Russo approached, his polished shoes stopping just a few steps away. He leaned forward, eyes fixed on his unconscious son beneath her jacket. No gratitude, no softening in his gaze, only a silence sharp as a blade. Another man, clearly a doctor, appeared behind him, carrying a dark leather medical bag unlike anything Emily had ever seen in a normal hospital. He knelt and began checking Michael's vitals with swift, practiced motions. Don Russo remained still, hands clasped behind his back, head dipping slightly as he listened to the doctor whisper something too quiet for Emily to catch. His face twitched, his jaw tightening. Could be a drug, the doctor said aloud this time, glancing briefly at Emily as though assessing how much she understood. But not the kind meant to kill. Just enough to knock him out. Whoever slipped it into his drink knew the exact dosage. A thin hiss cut through the air as Don Russo turned toward her. How did you find him? His voice was gravel-low and danger-soaked. Emily drew a deep breath, trying to steady herself as fear gripped her. I had just finished my shift and took the alley like I do every night. I saw him lying there, not moving, and I thought maybe he'd passed out. I checked his wallet for family contacts or ID. Don Russo held her stare for another heartbeat before extending his hand. Emily hesitated, then slowly retrieved the dark brown leather wallet from the pocket of the jacket she had draped over Michael. She placed it in his hand with both of hers, as if handing over something sacred. And in this moment, perhaps it was, Don Russo opened the wallet, not to check the money or the credit cards, but to take out a matte black business card with metallic gold embossed lettering. The front was utterly blank, except for a single, elegantly printed phone number. On the back, a line of inked handwriting read, "In case of emergency." He held the card up, his razor-sharp gaze drilling into Emily. "You called this number?" She nodded slowly, her throat dry. I didn't know who it belonged to, but I didn't know who else to call. And I thought he didn't have much time left." Silence draped itself over the alley. He gave a small nod as if confirming an unpleasant truth. Instead of slipping the card back into the wallet, he held it between two gloved fingers and extended it toward her. "Keep it," he said, his voice low and cold like cracking ice. Emily blinked in shock, her hand pulling back slightly. I don't need." "Take it," he cut her off. A command that allowed no refusal. "You used it to save my son. In our world, once a door is opened, it doesn't close so easily. Keep it safe." Emily reached out with trembling fingers and accepted the card. The sharp paper edge grazed her skin with a chilling sense of omen. Don Russo slipped the wallet into the inner pocket of his coat and signaled to his men. One of the suited men stepped forward, lifting Michael in his strong arms with such care that his head didn't even shift. The doctor gathered his bag and walked alongside. Don Russo's gaze never left Emily. "What is your name?" "Emily Carson." "Where do you work?" "Hudson Diner." "Just across the street." He flicked a glance toward the dimly flickering sign behind her, then back, his voice cooling further. "Do you know who he is?" "No, I've never seen him before tonight." Don Russo narrowed his eyes as if weighing the truth inside her words. A tense pressure thickened the air, and Emily felt as though she were being examined under a microscope. "Did you touch anything besides the wallet?" "No, I only took it out to look for information." I didn't take anything." He nodded again. A soft whistle cut through the damp air, and the men began moving back toward the cars. Michael was lowered into the back seat with eerie gentleness, but Don Russo remained still, as though he was not quite finished. "You saved my son," he said, his voice rising from somewhere deep and unyielding. "But you also saw something no one outside my family is ever meant to see. You stepped into a world that does not belong to you, Emily Carson." She swallowed hard, her breath tight and frantic. I won't say anything. I swear." Don Russo's eyes narrowed further. "I believe you. But sometimes kindness leads people into places where there is no way back." He turned toward the car, walking like a king, returning to his throne, the darkness folding behind him like a cloak. Emily stood alone in the rain, her heart pounding like a war drum, her mind spinning with unanswered questions. And inside her jacket pocket, her phone still radiated faint warmth, a reminder that one simple call had redrawn the entire map of her life. Emily remained frozen in the empty alley, the darkness wrapping around her like a cold, unforgiving coat. The black cars had vanished, taking Michael Russo and his powerful father with them, leaving her alone with the biting air and a swarm of unspoken fears. Everything had happened too fast, too abruptly, and she wasn't sure if her trembling came from the cold, the terror, or some deeper stirring she could not name. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart still hammering out of rhythm. No one was left. The rain had stopped, but the street still shimmered beneath the streetlight like a thin sheet of glass. Emily walked out of the alley in a daze, her legs stiff from kneeling too long, her soaked shoes squishing with every step. She didn't know what else to do except return to her tiny apartment where everything was worn but at least belonged to her. Don Russo's words echoed through her mind. She had stepped into a world that did not belong to her. And exactly like that, she felt as though she had slipped into a black and white noir film filled with Mafia shadows, hidden agendas, and power plays where a single wrong step could cost a life. When her apartment door clicked shut behind her, Emily leaned against it and released a long, exhausted breath. She didn't turn on the light. In the familiar darkness, things felt less frightening. Still, even with her eyes closed, the icy stare of Don Russo hovered in her thoughts. She sank into the wooden chair by the window, her hand still gripping the phone like letting go might unravel the last threads of truth. The screen lit up as she opened her call log. The number was still there, nameless and faceless, a lone sequence of digits that had rewritten her entire life in one night. She didn't know why she did it, but her finger touched the number as if her heart moved before her mind. She didn't call. She simply saved it under a simple name, "Do not call." Something strange stirred inside her, not fear. Something more like a thread linking her to the unconscious man she had fought to save. To the name Michael Russo she had never heard until tonight, but now echoed through her mind like a haunting refrain. Logic urged her to forget all of this, return to her usual routine, work the late shifts, pay the rent, and pretend nothing had happened. But her heart refused. She wanted to know whether he had woken up, whether he had survived, whether her call had truly saved a life, or merely pulled her into a darker scheme she had brushed against by accident. The sudden ring of her phone cut sharply through the dim apartment, making Emily jolt. The screen displayed the very number she had just saved. Impossible. She stared at the glowing words, "Do not call," blinking like a living warning. Her hand shook as she answered, "Hello." The voice on the other end was just as before. Low, firm, offering no name. "Do you have a minute?" She stammered. "Mr. Russo. I'm calling to confirm one thing," he said slowly. Each word weighted. "You truly don't know who Michael is?" "No," she said honestly. "I just saw he needed help." Another silence. Shorter this time, but heavier. "He has woken," he said at last, his voice no softer. "And he wants to know who called me." Relief and dread tangled inside her. She should have felt grateful that Michael survived, but the next question nearly stopped her heart. "Are you willing to meet him again?" She bit her lip, torn between instinct and reason. The correct answer was probably no. But in the quietest moment, she heard her own voice whisper, "Yes." On the other end, Mr. Russo said nothing, then hung up. No further words. The screen went dark again, reflecting the confused, conflicted face of Emily Carson, who had just agreed to take one more step into a world she had been warned did not belong to her. The next morning, Emily woke in a state that felt almost like she had never slept at all. She had tossed and turned the entire night, her mind spinning between fear and curiosity. She had said yes in a moment that didn't entirely feel like her own. But now, with daylight pushing through the thin old curtains of her window, everything appeared sharp, unavoidable, and painfully real. Michael Russo was awake, and he wanted to see her. She had no idea what that meant. Gratitude, interrogation, or something worse. Even as she changed into her uniform for her morning shift at the Hudson Diner, Emily couldn't shake the strange sense that she was walking toward a door that had already been opened for her, not knowing if what lay behind it was light or an abyss. She was wiping down the tables near the window when the sleek black car pulled up across the street. She didn't need to see the license plate or the driver to know exactly who had arrived. The door opened and a man stepped out. Don Vincent Russo wore a charcoal gray suit beneath a long black coat that brushed the tops of his shoes. Dark sunglasses hid most of his face, but nothing could hide the overwhelming weight of authority that radiated from him with every measured step. He stood there with his hands in his coat pockets, silently watching her through the diner's window. Emily froze, the cloth slipping from her hand without her noticing. No one inside the diner paid him much attention. Locals were used to strangers passing through. But Emily knew this man was unlike anyone else. He didn't enter. Instead, he gave a slight nod. A summons so quiet and absolute it needed no words. Emily glanced toward the counter where her manager was busy toting receipts. She untied her apron, left it draped over a chair, and walked out of the front door like someone moving in a dream. No one tried to stop her. Outside, the cold air slapped against her face like a sudden awakening. Don Russo said nothing as he held the car door open with a subtle lift of his hand. Emily stepped inside, her heart thudding so hard she feared it might crack her ribs. He moved around to the driver's seat, got in, and started the engine. There was no music, no GPS voice, only the soft whisper of tires gliding across damp asphalt. "Michael is still weak," he said after several minutes of silence. "But awake. He wants to speak to you directly," and I agreed. His voice held no warmth, no sentiment, as if he were discussing a delivery schedule or a meeting agenda. "Why me?" Emily asked, her voice so small she wasn't sure it even left her lips. "Because you did what most people in this neighborhood would never do," he replied, eyes fixed on the road. "You didn't take the wallet. You didn't call the press. You didn't walk away." Emily said nothing. It wasn't praise. It was an assessment. Cold and factual. They passed through 3 blocks, turning onto a narrow street with a tall iron gate, and 2 men in black suits standing guard. The car didn't slow. The gate opened before they even reached it. Inside, an old-style mansion sat deep within the property, secluded from the outside world, as if deliberately removed from it. Emily swallowed, feeling like a lamb straying into a den of wolves. When the car stopped, a man opened the door for her. Don Russo didn't get out. He only tilted his head toward her, his gaze behind the dark lenses still carrying that frostbitten weight. "You don't need to be afraid," he said. "At least not while you're inside." Emily wasn't sure how to interpret that, but she stepped out anyway, her feet trembling slightly against the cold stone pathway. An older woman met her and guided her through a long carpeted hallway lined with heavy wooden furniture and somber oil paintings. They stopped at a mahogany door. The woman knocked 3 times, then pushed it open. "Miss Carson is here, sir." Emily stepped inside. The room was not large, and soft morning light from the window fell across the bed near the wall where a man sat propped against the pillows, his gaze already fixed on the doorway. Michael Russo, awake, alive, and looking straight at her. Emily remained standing for a few seconds, the sounds around her dimming until all she could hear was her own heartbeat. Michael gave her a faint sincere smile. "Emily Carson," he said, his voice low and hoarse. "Good to meet you, well conscious this time." Emily stayed at the threshold, as if the slightest movement might shatter the delicate stillness of the room. The gentle light illuminated his pale complexion, and the dark eyes studying her intently. He looked completely different from the man collapsed in the alley, alert, steady, carrying a kind of presence that made her feel as if she wasn't standing in front of a man, but at the entrance to another world. "Please sit," Michael said, his voice rough but clear. Emily stepped forward, choosing the leather chair beside the bed. Her hands felt stiff on her lap, and she fought to keep them from trembling. Michael watched her without rushing, as if measuring her reactions before releasing judgment. "My father said you were the one who called him," he began, his eyes holding hers. "Yes," Emily said softly but firmly. "I found you in the alley behind the diner, barely breathing. I didn't know who else to call, so I checked your wallet for a contact." "And you didn't take anything from the wallet?" Michael asked. The words came gently, but they carried a weight that thickened the air. Emily blinked, heat tightening in her throat. "No, I just wanted to help." Michael nodded very slightly, as though her answer aligned with what he had expected. "Where I grew up," he said slowly. "Kindness usually has a price. A stranger doesn't do something good unless they want something in return." Emily felt her face warm as she clenched her hands together. "I didn't know who you were. I didn't want anything. I just saw someone who was about to die and couldn't walk away." Michael tilted his head, his eyes narrowing as if trying to see past the exterior she presented. A quiet tension hung between them. Then, unexpectedly, he let out a soft, genuine laugh. "Then, I suppose I owe you my life." Emily exhaled, her shoulders easing. The air in the room seemed to soften. Michael leaned back against the pillows, closing his eyes for a brief moment before looking at her again. "Do you know where you've set foot, Emily?" "I'm starting to," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. He gave another faint laugh. This one touched with resignation. My father is not a forgiving man. To him, nothing is random. Everything that happens must have, meaning you found me. You dialed the right number. You didn't leave. All of that to him is a sign. And he doesn't like signs he can't control. Emily held his gaze. So, what will he do? Nothing, Michael said, pausing. As long as I say you're safe, and I am saying that. The door opened softly. The older woman entered again, placing a tray of tea on the table and whispering something into Michael's ear. He nodded, then turned back to Emily. You can go. There's a car waiting by the gate. My father won't trouble you and I hope this won't be the last time we talk. Emily rose, her heart still pounding, but steadier now. I hope so, too. As she stepped out of the room, she glanced back. Michael was still watching her, his eyes no longer filled with suspicion or scrutiny, but with something she never expected to find here. Trust, or at least the longing for it. 3 days later, Emily Carson still hadn't been able to return to anything resembling normal. She still arrived at the Hudson Diner on time, still tied on her apron and slipped into the same worn-out shoes, still carried coffee to regulars with a polite smile and clear, attentive eyes. But inside, everything had shifted. She heard the jingle of the door, felt the flicker of the lights, listened to the soft clatter of forks against plates, and the steady hum of customer conversations, as if they were the background music of a life she no longer belonged to. But now it all felt like a faint copy of the life she had lived before. Sleepless nights, moments when she jolted awake at the slightest sound outside her door. The image of Michael Russo lying unconscious under the rain, and then waking to look at her with a gaze no one had ever given her before. All threaded through her mind like a film with no ending. And always the cold eyes of Don Vincent Russo, a man who could crush her life with a single nod. Even though his son had assured her safety, she couldn't forget that silent warning embedded in his stare. That afternoon, the diner was unusually crowded. Maybe the temperature dropping had driven more people toward hot coffee and plates of beef stew to fight off the autumn wind seeping through every crack in the windows. Emily was wiping the counter when Janet, her coworker, approached with an expression glowing as if she had just spotted a movie star. Emily, she whispered, her eyes sparkling. Someone at table 12 is asking for you. Asking specifically for you. Emily turned, feeling her heart skip. Who is it? Some ridiculously handsome guy. Janet grinned. Rolex watch. Perfectly tailored suit. Looks like he stepped straight out of a cologne commercial. And he's sitting there like he's waiting for the exact person he came to see. Are you secretly seeing someone in your dreams? Emily wiped her hands on a towel and walked slowly toward table 12, where a man sat facing the window. As she approached, he turned. Michael Russo, no longer pale. No longer wrapped in bandages or sharp suspicion, just a healthy, composed man in a light gray suit and open-collared shirt, carrying an effortless poise that none of the customers could ever guess had nearly bled out in an alley just a few blocks away. He stood when she reached the table, a gesture so considerate that even nearby patrons glanced over. Emily Carson, he said, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I hope I'm not disturbing you by coming here. She felt warmth rise in her cheeks, but kept her composure. No, just I didn't think you would find you. He tilted his head, his eyes warm, but shadowed by something deeper. I knew you still worked here and I owe you a proper conversation. Last time I was lying in a hospital bed, half conscious, not the best way to begin a relationship. She sat, noticing Janet trying and failing to pretend she wasn't eavesdropping from behind the counter. Emily placed the menu on the table, though she knew he wouldn't need it. What would you like to drink? A black coffee, no sugar, Michael replied. Same thing I ordered the first time I came here. You've been here before? Emily asked, surprised. Once a long time ago, I remember it because the place smelled like warm apple pie. She didn't know what surprised her more, that he had once been at Hudson Diner, or that he remembered the smell. When she returned with the coffee, he accepted the cup and murmured, "Thank you." Then he paused as if choosing his words carefully. I didn't come only to thank you for saving my life, he said. I came because I want to know what made you do it. You didn't know who I was. You had no reason to take that risk. Emily met his eyes steadily. Because if I were the one lying there, I'd hope someone would stop for me. Michael smiled, a thoughtful curve of his lips. And that, he said softly, is exactly why I knew I had to see you again. She didn't know how to respond. She only felt her fingers grip the edge of her chair. Suddenly aware that for the first time in her life, the fear she felt wasn't about danger. It was about something beginning, something she wasn't sure she was ready for. Michael set his cup down, his gaze fixed on her as if he were weighing something far more serious than their words suggested. The air between them grew so still that even the sounds of the diner seemed muted. Emily straightened her posture, her hands clutching the fabric of her apron hidden in her lap. Sensing that his gaze wasn't judging her. It was something deeper, something quietly searching. She wasn't used to being the center of anyone's attention, much less the attention of a man like Michael Russo. I didn't plan to come here today, he said after a moment, his voice low and smooth. But since that night, I haven't stopped thinking about you, about the way you looked at me at the foot of the bed. Not many people look at me like that. Emily let out a small laugh to ease the tension. Probably because I didn't know who you were. But you do now, he replied, head tilted. And you're still sitting here. That's what interests me. She exhaled, sidestepping the intensity of his words by rising to her feet with her order pad. Are you sure you don't want something to eat? Michael studied her for a long moment before he smiled. Not here. Emily paused. What do you mean? I want to take you to lunch. A proper lunch somewhere quieter, cleaner than this coffee-stained table. She stared at him, hesitant. The invitation sounded gentle, but behind it was a pull she couldn't quite resist, not because he was handsome or charming, but because there was a quiet sincerity in the request that seemed impossible to dismiss. Still, Emily tried to stay rational. You know I can't leave my shift in the middle. I already spoke to your manager, he said with an easy shrug, as if it were nothing. You can take an hour. She glanced toward the counter where Janet was wiping the same table for the third time in 5 minutes. Her manager, Harold, was on the phone, glancing at her and Michael with clear confusion. Emily looked back at Michael, feeling the world around her tilt slightly. Do you always get things your way? Only when I really want something, he answered without hesitation, then softened his voice. And I want the chance to understand the woman who saved my life. She hesitated for a few more seconds, then untied her apron, folded it carefully, and placed it over the chair. Michael stood and opened the door for her. Such a simple gesture, but in the bustling chaos of a small diner, it suddenly felt strangely elegant. A black car waited outside, its back door already open as if it had been waiting for this moment. Emily stepped in without another word. She knew exactly what she was doing, or at least thought she did. Michael joined her, sitting close enough for her to catch the faint scent of his cologne, mingled with the leather interior, yet far enough to give her space. The car glided through the streets, past familiar intersections, and out of the neighborhood she had lived in nearly her entire life. She didn't ask where they were going, and didn't care what the restaurant would be called. All she knew was that for the first time in years, she was leaving her shift not because she was sick, not because she was exhausted, but because someone wanted to take her to lunch. Not to use her, not to force her, but simply because she had done the right thing. And that small truth was enough to make her entire world begin to shift. The restaurant Michael brought her to wasn't a dazzling place with glittering chandeliers or long white tablecloths sweeping to the floor like in the movies. It sat quietly on a corner in Soho, its wooden sign simply carved, its interior warm with soft amber lighting, and old jazz drifting gently through the air. An older man in a white shirt greeted Michael the moment he stepped inside, shaking his hand like a father welcoming a son home. They exchanged a few words in Italian. Then Michael turned to her, his eyes warm. I used to come here with my mother, he said, his voice lowering. She loved the ravioli here and always sat by the window. Emily glanced around, unable to hide her surprise. I thought you'd eat somewhere more extravagant. I grew up on family meals, not gourmet tasting menus, Michael replied. People see the bright lights of the world I belong to. But inside, everything had much humbler roots. She settled into a soft leather chair across from him at a dark wooden table. The server set down 2 glasses of water and smiled at her as though he had known her for years. She had no idea what she was stepping into, but the warmth of the place softened her guard just a little. "I always thought," she began, eyes lingering on the water glass, "that someone like you wouldn't even remember the names of ordinary streets." Michael let out a quiet laugh and placed the napkin over his lap. "You think I was born in a penthouse in Manhattan? I think you don't worry about gas prices or rent," she answered, studying his face. "That part is true," Michael admitted with neither pride nor discomfort, "but money doesn't buy peace. The more power you have, the less freedom you get." Emily stayed silent for a moment, then asked, "Do you have freedom?" He looked at her, his eyes suddenly deep and distant. "Only when I'm here talking to you?" She didn't know how to respond. His words weren't a flirtation. They were a quiet and painful truth. "What is your world really like?" she asked softly. Michael leaned back, his gaze steady on her. "What do you picture when you think of the Mafia? Violence, threats, people disappearing, those nighttime hits you only hear rumors about." "Not wrong," he nodded. "But that's just the surface. That world is about control, absolute faith in unwritten rules, knowing who's loyal and who will betray you, living every day not knowing who might stab you in the back." Emily shivered. "Then why don't you leave?" "Because it's not that simple," Michael said, his voice slowing. "Because I'm not just someone in that world. I'm the heir. I'm the blood, the name. I carry things you can't take off like an old coat." She looked at him and no longer saw the powerful, wealthy Michael Russo everyone imagined. She saw a man trapped between duty and freedom, between the path he was born into and the one his heart longed for. "Are you afraid?" she whispered. Michael didn't answer right away. After a long moment, he nodded. "I'm afraid of becoming the exact kind of man I swore I'd never be. Afraid of looking in the mirror one day and not recognizing myself." Emily felt something tighten in her chest. Partly because she understood the feeling. Partly because she realized she was softening toward him. "Do you know where you're going?" "No," he said, his gaze never leaving hers. "But since meeting you, I've started to believe there might be another path." The food arrived, but neither of them rushed to eat. Between them, between their 2 worlds, a silence was forming, not a wall, but a small bridge, fragile yet enough for both to take one more step forward. On the way back from the restaurant, the air inside carried the lingering warmth of their conversation. Emily sat quietly beside Michael, her eyes drifting to the window as the building slid by slowly. The street lights casting pale gold over her face. She could still feel the echo of his final words from lunch beating softly inside her chest, something delicate yet profound, something she couldn't ignore. Perhaps because for the first time in years, she felt seen not for her status or appearance, but as if she were a choice, a possibility, an escape. The car stopped a few buildings away from her block. Emily didn't want this sleek car to pull up directly in front of her rundown building where everyone watched everything and whispered about everyone. She turned to Michael, her hand on the door handle. "Thank you for lunch," she said, gentle and sincere. "And for not asking anything more of me." "I didn't need to ask," Michael replied, his eyes fixed on hers. "I wanted you to know that I respect your silence as much as your words." She nodded and stepped out. The air outside was colder now as evening crept in, a gust slipping under her collar and making her shiver. The car pulled away, leaving Emily alone beneath the flickering streetlight. She pulled her coat tighter around her and began walking through the old neighborhood. The familiar street suddenly felt strangely still. She sensed a silence that didn't belong, as if the whole block was holding its breath. When she turned into the narrow alley leading to the back entrance of her building, a voice rose from the shadows. "Hello, pretty girl." Emily froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. From between 2 parked cars, a man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a dark jacket, his twisted smirk dripping with meaning. Before she could react, 2 more figures emerged behind her, trapping her like a tightening net. "No need to be scared," the first man said, his voice stretching in pleasure at her panic. "We just want a little chat about your new friend, Michael Russo." Emily stepped back until her spine met the cold brick wall. I don't know what you're talking about. Come on, the second man said, smaller, but with eyes sharp and cold. You had lunch with him. You saved his life. You know too much. The first man moved closer, the smell of smoke and alcohol hitting her like a wave. So, you're going to tell us where he's staying? His routines, his protection, his schedule. The more the better. I don't know anything, Emily blurted out, her voice trembling but steady. I'm just a waitress. A waitress, the third man behind her said with a low chuckle. Who somehow has Don Russo's emergency number in her pocket. Interesting. The first man pulled out a small knife. The steel glinting under the weak street light. I think you know more than you think. Emily felt the danger closing in on her like a vice. She glanced around. No one in sight. No footsteps, no witnesses in the narrow chalk-cold alley. She could scream, but would anyone come? As the knife edged closer, the screech of tires tore through the air at the mouth of the alley, headlights slicing across the darkness. All three men turned just as two black cars shot into the alley like arrows. The doors flew open almost simultaneously, and 5 men in dark suits stepped out, moving fast and precise like a strike team. A deep voice echoed, no need for shouting, but enough to freeze the entire world in place. Let her go. Michael emerged from behind them, dressed in a white shirt, his face stripped of all gentleness. His stare at the 3 men was so cold, it looked like he was choosing which one to end first. The man with the knife retreated instantly, the blade disappearing into his sleeve as if it had never existed. All 3 backed away, their eyes full of hatred, but fully aware of the danger in front of them. This isn't over, Russo. One of them spat before all 3 vanished into the shadows like smoke. Michael didn't respond. He rushed to Emily's side, worry breaking through the ice in his expression. Are you hurt? She shook her head. But when Michael's hand brushed her shoulder, she realized her entire body was trembling. Not from cold, from fear. Because tonight made one thing painfully clear. This was no longer someone else's world. It was hers. And it was closing around her inch by inch. Michael guided Emily out of the alley. His hand resting lightly yet firmly at her elbow, as if letting go would allow her to dissolve back into the nightmare that had nearly swallowed her. She didn't speak, only moved with him like someone untethered, every breath still tainted by the lingering scent of cigarettes and fear lodged tight in her chest. One of the men who had arrived with Michael opened the car door, and before she could react, Michael eased her gently onto the back seat. The door closed, and quiet wrapped around them like a heavy blanket. Michael slid in beside her, his gaze never leaving her face, where the imprint of terror still clung stubbornly. The car pulled away, gliding silently through the tired streets, leaving behind the first cracks in the fragile veil between 2 worlds. Are you sure you're not hurt? Michael asked again, his voice low and softer this time, but stretched tight like a wire, ready to snap. Emily nodded, the small movement sending strands of hair falling forward to shield her eyes. A long silence passed before she whispered, How did they even know about me? About you? They said your name like they knew everything. Michael's hand tightened into a fist, his jaw rigid as he stared out the window where the street lights stray in blurred lines. Because they're sending a message. What message? That my family is weakening. That if they can reach the people near me, they can do far more than that. Emily turned toward him, fear flickering with anger in her gaze. And what am I to them? A target? A warning? Michael didn't answer right away. He inhaled deeply as though wrestling with what he should keep hidden and what truths could no longer be buried. That family has been our rival for nearly 2 decades. Viktor Kozlov doesn't just want control. He wants to erase every trace of Don Russo, including me. What happened the night you found me wasn't an accident. Emily felt the air rush out of her lungs. You mean the poisoning? A warning shot? Someone close to us betrayed the family. And you, the one who saved me, the one who called my father accidentally, became a critical link. Michael turned fully toward her now, his eyes stripped of any evasiveness. Tonight, they wanted to test you, to scare you, and if you broke, they'd have the excuse they needed to tear us apart from the inside. Emily shook her head, refusing to believe what she was hearing. "I'm just a waitress. I'm not part of this power game. But you stepped into it the moment you called my father." His voice sank lower. "And if you think you can go back to being an outsider now, after everything you've heard, after everything you've seen, I'm afraid there's no way out anymore." She stayed silent for a long time. Not out of fear, but because she was piecing everything together slowly, painfully. She remembered the look in Don Russo's eyes that night in the alley. The way he studied her as though deciding where she belonged on an enormous chessboard. She remembered their lunch earlier, Michael's soft confession about freedom, about the burden of his family's name. And now all of it stood before her, undeniable. "So what am I to you, Michael?" she asked at last, her voice barely audible. "A piece and a strategy, a pawn you need to protect?" Michael held her gaze, his dark eyes stripped of every facade, leaving only raw honesty. "No, you're the only reason I've started to believe another life might exist. You're a choice, not a pawn." The car pulled up in front of a tall building glowing with warm light through its wide windows. A man in a black suit opened the door and stepped back as though he'd been briefed in advance. Michael didn't say anything more. He simply placed a gentle hand at the small of her back, guiding her toward the place he intended to keep her safe, even if it meant exposing every truth he had tried to shield her from. And Emily, heart trembling, raw and half-broken, walked beside him, knowing that beyond this door lay not only safety, but a truth she could never unlearn. The penthouse Michael brought her to sat on the top floor, overlooking the entire sweep of the Hudson River. When the door opened, she was struck by the vastness and quiet, an entire world suspended high above the rest of the city. Soft light washed over polished walnut floors, the space immaculate, elegant, yet not cold. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline of New York, shimmering under the night. Emily stepped in slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of a chair as if she needed to confirm the place was real. She wasn't used to a world where doors opened with fingerprints, where every corner held hidden cameras, where security hummed silently like an invisible guardian. Michael walked to a control panel set into the wall. Pressing a few buttons, the curtains slid shut on their own, the lights lowered to a gentle dim. He turned to her, his voice quieter than she'd ever heard. "There's two-layer security here. For staff on watch 24 hours a day, and only one unit on this entire floor. You'll be safe." Emily nodded, though her fingers clutched her backstrap like an anchor to the life she used to know. "And if I want to leave," she asked, not out of distrust, but because she needed to know she still had a choice. Michael stepped closer, standing directly in front of her. "I won't keep you here, but I can't promise you won't be followed or approached. Staying here is the safest option, at least until I know exactly who came after you." She looked at him, then really looked, and saw the worry he wasn't hiding. This wasn't the gaze of a man from a world of power. It was the gaze of someone terrified of losing something precious. A young woman stepped through a side door, then, dressed neatly, her posture respectful. "I'm Rachel," she said gently. "I'll assist you during your stay. Your room is ready. If you need anything, just ask." Emily thanked her softly and followed her down a quiet hallway to a bedroom tucked away at the back of the penthouse. Inside was a bed made with crisp white sheets, soft amber lamps, and the faint scent of lavender drifting through the air. She sat on the edge of the bed, slipping off the worn shoes that had carried her through years of shifts at Hudson Diner. Her feet ached, her eyes burned. Yet sleep wouldn't come. Everything was too quiet, too spotless, too far from home. She missed her small apartment with its rattling heater, the neighbors' music humming through thin walls, the stray cats scratching at the trash cans outside. Here, the perfection itself made her feel out of place. The bedroom door opened slightly, and Michael stood there, leaning against the frame, not stepping inside. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay," he murmured. "I'm fine," she whispered back, though both of them knew it wasn't entirely true. He lingered a moment, then withdrew, leaving her alone with the night and all the questions that had no answers yet. That night, Emily lay in the bed soft as cloud, listening to the wind brushing the windows, wondering when a simple life had become such a distant luxury. and wondering when her heart had agreed to stay in a place her mind insisted she should flee. But deep within, she already knew. She had entered a story she could no longer step out of. Not anymore. The next morning, the pale winter sunlight slipped through the narrow gap in the curtains, filling the room with a fragile wash of muted light. Emily woke with the fleeting sensation that she might still be dreaming. But the gentle trace of essential oils in the air and the unfamiliar softness beneath her bare feet as they touched the plush carpet pulled her quickly back into reality. She stood, drew on a robe, and stepped out into the main room. Michael was in the kitchen, a cup of coffee in hand, his eyes distant as they swept over the faraway city. At the sound of her footsteps, he turned, offering a small nod as though the distance between them had thinned just a little more overnight. "Good morning," he said. "I made coffee. There's fresh bread, too, if you want some." She accepted the warm mug he handed her, the heat spreading slowly through her chilled body. "Thank you," she murmured, settling into the sofa by the window. Michael sat across from her, not circling around the moment, not delaying as if he knew some truths were ready finally to be spoken aloud. "Emily," he began. "You once asked why people like Viktor Kov want to take everything. I think it's time I tell you everything." She nodded, bracing herself. "The Italian Mafia in America didn't disappear into movies," he said quietly. "It became a network woven through generations, tied to politics, finance, real estate, even the courts. My family, the Russos, is one of the last branches still holding on to any form of honor. And that alone makes us a threat to men who want power at any cost." He paused, eyes darkening with memories. "My father, Don Vincent Russo, is one of the last men who truly believes loyalty and integrity can survive in this world. He has rules. No drugs. No harm to women or children. No betrayal among brothers. But the world changes faster than principles can keep up." Emily gripped her cup, absorbing every word. "Viktor Kov represents the new generation where money is everything. Honor is just dead weight. He wants the entire East Side under his control. Wants to remove my family from the map. Poisoning me wasn't the first attempt, just the closest they've come." "And the people who follow him?" Emily asked, her gaze fixed on him. "Most are men who once owed my family their lives or used to be friends. That's how a collapse begins from inside. He doesn't need a full-scale war. He only needs to plant doubt, divide loyalties, by the right people at the right time. People like Tony Marches sold us out." Michael held her gaze. "You need to understand something. This world isn't just expensive cars and tailored suits and luxurious dinners. Behind all that are sleepless nights. Meetings where laughter sits next to a gun, silence in the middle of funerals, and eyes that never stop watching your back." Emily set her cup down, her mind a storm of tangled thoughts. Everything Michael said echoed the rumors she'd heard in half-whispered conversations at the diner, the quiet legends of the shadows. But hearing it from him, spoken with weary honesty, turned rumor into a truth she could no longer ignore. "Then why do you stay?" she asked softly. The question stilled him. He leaned back, staring up at the ceiling as though trying to coax out an answer he'd long avoided. "Because of my father. Because my mother once said, no one keeps their soul by rejecting the place they were born into. I've tried to leave more times than I can count. But every time I look at him at the way he holds together a family already rotting from the inside. I can't walk away." His voice faltered. Then he looked at her again. Something new, something unguarded, flickering behind his eyes. "But lately, I've been thinking about another path, a way out. And all of that started the night you saved me." Emily said nothing. A storm churned in her chest. Fear and warmth. Logic and longing colliding in painful knots. But beneath it all was something she could no longer pretend not to see. Michael didn't just want her to understand his world. He wanted her to be the person he could walk away with. And the most terrifying part was that some part of her wanted the same thing. The penthouse was wrapped in soft, muted light. When the clock neared 3 o'clock in the morning, Emily couldn't sleep. She sat curled on the long window seat, wrapped in a thin robe, clutching a small pillow against her chest. Outside, the city remained awake, its shimmering lights pulsing like the heartbeat of a giant creature that never rested. Behind her came the steady sound of footsteps. Michael too had been unable to sleep. He walked over with 2 cups of hot tea, handed her one, then sat beside her without a word. They stayed that way for a long stretch of silence, as though their presence alone filled the space more than any conversation could. At last, Emily found her voice. "Are you afraid?" Michael looked at her, and the confidence he usually wore, effortless, natural, fell away. "Yes," he said softly, like a confession he'd never dared to say aloud. "I'm afraid of losing myself. Afraid of becoming the man my father has had to become. Afraid that no matter how hard I try, I'll never escape the shadow of this." Emily. Emily sipped her tea, its warmth unable to thaw the cold nestled deep within her. "Then why tell me all this? You didn't have to." Michael turned fully toward her, his eyes seeing through every defense she still held. "Because I don't want to lie to you. You were the first person to see me at my weakest, and you stayed. I owe you the truth. And more than that, I want you to know the real me, not the name, not the reputation." She tightened her hold on the cup, her heart sinking at the sincerity in his voice. "And if the real you can't leave that world behind." Michael was silent. Then he set his cup aside and rose, walking to the window. The city's glow lit his face, revealing a profound fatigue, usually hidden beneath his composed exterior. "I've thought about it more than you know," he said quietly. "About walking away, disappearing from all of this, starting over somewhere no one knows my name." Emily straightened, her heart pressing against her ribs. "You mean that?" He nodded without turning. "I don't know how easy it would be or how dangerous. But if I had someone to walk away with, if I had you, then I believe anything is possible." Her breath caught. What he was offering wasn't just an invitation. It was a crossroads. A turning point that would erase the life she'd known and weave her into something new, irreversible. She rose and stepped to his side, the two of them standing shoulder to shoulder before the waking city. "If you leave it all behind, you'll lose everything you have. Your family, your power, your name. Are you ready for that?" Michael turned to her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he didn't answer with words. Instead, he lifted his hand and brushed his fingers gently against her cheek, his eyes unbearably sincere. "If the only thing I have left is you," he whispered, "then I still have everything." Emily felt her eyes burn, tears gathering with unexpected friend's force. After years of living in the dim corners of her own life, she had never imagined a man like him saying something like this to her, much less meaning it. "You don't have to decide anything today," Michael added, drawing his hand back slowly. "I just need you to know. If you ever choose to walk away from all of this, I'll walk with you. Not because of fear, but because of choice." Outside, the first streaks of dawn broke through the skyline, slipping between buildings like a promise. Emily leaned her head gently against his shoulder. She didn't speak, but the silence itself was an answer, rich and unmistakable. And in that moment, both of them understood they had stepped one breath further beyond the boundaries of their old lives toward something unnamed, fragile, and impossibly real. But that fragile piece was thin as breath on glass before the rose-gold light outside the window could fully spread. The shrill ring of a phone cut through the quiet, slicing the moment open and pulling both of them straight back into the brutal reality waiting on the other side. Michael stiffened, the hand resting lightly on Emily's shoulder, slipping away as though the world had suddenly reclaimed him. He reached for the phone on the table, and in the instant he looked at the screen. Emily saw the man who, moments earlier, had confessed fear and longing for freedom vanish. In his place stood the Michael Russo of the underworld, cold, sharp-edged, alert in a way that made the air itself tighten. He answered without needing to look. "Yes, Father." Emily held her breath, her hands tightening together in her lap, feeling the temperature in the room drop despite the steady hum of the heater. Through the faint static on the speaker, Don Vincent Russo's authoritative voice carried clearly low and weighted enough that she heard every unspoken threat between the lines. "We found him. He's at the old warehouse by the docks. Don't fail me again." Michael's answer was as steady as ice. "I won't. I'm handling it now." He hung up, turned his back to the window, his broad shoulders tensing beneath the thin white shirt. Whatever softness he'd shown minutes before was sealed away, locked behind an expression that belonged to a man built of duty and war. When he faced her again, his eyes no longer held hope for some distant future. They held urgency. "Tony Marches," he said, the name falling like a sentence. "They've got him. I have to go." The drive to the docks was silent, the tension inside the car thick enough to choke on. When the car stopped in front of a rusted, imposing warehouse, Michael turned to her. His face was set in stone, but his eyes held a flicker of conflict. "Stay in the car," he ordered softly. Emily shook her head, her hand gripping the door handle. "No, you said I'm part of this now. I need to know what that means." Michael studied her for a long moment, then nodded once, sharp and final. He stepped out, and she followed him into the biting wind coming off the water. They walked past armed men who nodded in deference, entering the cavernous building. It smelled of salt, rust, and old oil. However, just before they reached a heavy metal door at the center of the facility, Michael stopped. He turned and blocked her path, placing his hands on her shoulders. The warmth of his touch was the only thing anchoring her in the freezing air. "You stop here," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "But no," Michael cut her off, his gaze intense. "I brought you here so you understand the reality of my life. I don't hide the truth from you, but I will not let you watch a man die. That is a burden I carry, so you don't have to." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and pushed open the heavy door, stepping inside and closing it firmly behind him. Emily was left alone in the dimly lit corridor, guarded by two silent men, standing a respectful distance away. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She stared at the metal door, straining her ears through the thick steel. Voices were muffled but audible. She heard Michael's voice low, calm, devoid of anger. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was terrifying in its flatness. Then another voice, desperate, pleading, rising in pitch. "That must be Tony Marches. Please, Michael, don't." The cry was faint, muffled by the walls, but it sent a shiver down Emily's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Then, silence. A silence so heavy it felt like it was pressing against her eardrums. Emily held her breath, her hands clutching the fabric of her coat, waiting for something she prayed wouldn't come. Bang! The gunshot was singular, loud, and final. It echoed through the metal structure, a sharp crack that severed the silence and made Emily jump. A gasp escaping her lips. Then silence returned. Absolute unyielding. Tears pricked her eyes, not for the traitor, but for the reality crashing down on her. A life had just ended, meters away from where she stood, and the man she loved had pulled the trigger or ordered it done. A minute later, the metal door opened. Michael stepped out. He adjusted his cuffs, his face composed, but there was a weariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a man who had just done a terrible necessary job. He walked straight to her, ignoring his guards. He didn't touch her, as if afraid the violence still clinging to him might taint her. "It's done," he said, his voice rough. Emily looked at him, searching for the cruelty she feared, but she only saw the burden. She realized then that he hadn't kept her outside just to spare her eyes. He had kept her outside to preserve the one part of his life that remained pure. "Let's go home," she whispered, her voice trembling, but steady. "Enough." Michael nodded, and for the first time that night, he let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. He placed a hand gently on the small of her back, guiding her away from the door, away from the death behind it, and back toward the cold night air. The elevator doors closed behind them, shutting out the darkness and damp smell of the docks, but the silence inside the penthouse carried its own kind of weight. Emily stood in the middle of the vast living room, warm golden light pooling over the soft fur rug beneath her feet. Yet, she could still feel the cold of the warehouse clinging to her skin like something that wouldn't wash off. She looked down at her hands, clean, untouched, but trembling uncontrollably. Michael stepped behind her, not touching her, only standing close enough that she could feel the faint warmth radiating from his body. He shrugged off his jacket and tossed it onto the sofa as if trying to shed the ruthless shell he had worn only moments earlier. "Go take a shower," he said, his voice rough and low, stripped of the cold authority he'd wielded in the warehouse and replaced with exhaustion. "The hot water will help you forget the cold." Emily turned to him. For the first time, she saw fear in Michael Russo's eyes. He wasn't afraid of enemies or death. He was afraid of her. Afraid the monster she had glimpsed in him would make her run. "You think I'm leaving?" she asked softly, her voice echoing in the still air. Michael poured himself a glass of liquor. The same hands that had once held a gun so steadily now hesitating as they grasped the crystal. "I wouldn't blame you," he murmured, unable to meet her eyes. "Tony deserved what happened, but that doesn't mean you deserve to be near it. I've pulled you too deep into this." Emily stepped closer, gently, taking the glass from his hand and setting it aside. She lifted both hands to his face, making him look at her. "I've seen you save a life. And I know what you just had to do," she whispered. "But the man standing in front of me right now is still the man who drinks his coffee black and talks about his mother with the softest voice I've ever heard." Michael closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against hers, releasing a long breath that sounded like it carried the weight of years. In that moment, Emily understood that her safety didn't come from bulletproof glass or guarded doors. It came from the fact that the most powerful man in the city was willing to lower his weapons for her forgiveness. When Emily stepped out of the shower, the sky had begun to shift, the dark grays giving way to the pale violet of dawn. She didn't go back to bed. Instead, she walked out onto the wide balcony where the wind from the Hudson River swept in, carrying the biting chill of a new day. She looked down at New York, stirring awake beneath her. Just days ago, she was a nameless speck in that crowd, worried about rent and night shifts. But the images of tonight, Tony Marches's desperate eyes, the cold gunshot, and the tremor in Michael's hands clung to her. "Run away?" Emily asked herself, gripping the cold stone railing. Michael had spoken of leaving, of abandoning it all. But run where? To an island, a foreign land. A cold, sharp realization sliced through her mind, clearer than anything she had ever felt. Viktor Kosov wouldn't stop. If Michael walked away from his power, he wouldn't be the hunter anymore. He would become the prey, and she would be that helpless girl in the dark alley again, shivering and waiting for the mercy of men with knives. Emily shivered, not from the cold, but from the revelation. Her innocence had died in that warehouse. She realized that in this brutal world, love wasn't enough to protect them. Only power, absolute power that made enemies tremble, could be the shield for the man she loved. Michael stepped out beside her, draping a thick coat over her shoulders. He said nothing, only stared at the burning horizon. "You talked about finding a way out," Emily said, her eyes fixed ahead, her voice no longer trembling, but strangely calm. "But have you ever thought that the only way out isn't running? It's changing the rules." Michael turned to her, surprise etched on his tired face. "What are you saying?" Emily pulled the coat tighter, turning to face him. Her eyes were steady, the fear from earlier forged into a steely resolve. "I've been thinking, Michael, if we leave, a man like Viktor Klov takes your place. He will hunt us to the ends of the earth. We would live our whole lives looking over our shoulders, jumping at every shadow." She stepped closer, placing a hand over his heart. "I don't want to live as a fugitive. I want to live beside the man who has the strength to ensure no one ever dares to touch us again." She took his hand, her voice firm. "If you stay and if I stand beside you, we can rebuild the Russo name the way you want it, not the way your father demands. We won't run. We will rule. You need someone who trusts you completely to do that. Isn't that right, Michael?" Michael stared at her, stunned. In the fierce eyes of this small woman, he didn't see disgust for the monster inside him, but understanding. She wasn't asking him to lay down his sword. She was offering to hold it with him. A slow smile spread across his face, one of admiration and reverence. He realized he hadn't just found someone to love. He had found a queen for his empire. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, a gesture more sacred than any vow. "All right," he whispered into the wind, his voice steady once more. "We won't run. We will set the new order." The sun broke over the skyline, blazing and triumphant, illuminating the two silhouettes standing close together above the city. Emily knew the path ahead would be harsh, perhaps even ruthless. But she was no longer the waitress Emily Carson. She was the woman who had chosen to take the devil's hand, not to fall into darkness, but to walk beside him toward the throne, where the only light was the love they held for each other. From this story, we are reminded of something profoundly human, that sometimes, in order to grow, in order to see our true worth and our inner strength, we must dare to step beyond the borders of what feels safe, dare to face challenges hidden, and dare to trust the choices that call to us. Emily's courage to help a stranger didn't just save a life. It opened a doorway to transformation, to deeper truths about loyalty, honesty, and the powerful threads that bind people together. It is a reminder that within every person lies the capacity to rise above hardship when they believe in themselves and act from a place of conscience. We hope this message resonates with you. Please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share the video so you won't miss the many heartfelt stories we bring each day. And most of all, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us how this story touched your heart, how it reflects your own life, and what lessons you've taken from it. Your reflections are deeply valued because they are what connect these stories to the real lives of each listener. Wishing every viewer good health, joy in daily life, and the inspiration to live fully and bravely in pursuit of what truly matters. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video where more emotional, powerful, and inspiring stories await. Goodbye and see you.